Did you know 1 in every 200 men alive today is a direct descendant of the same man? Statistically speaking, there is a high chance that you, or someone you know, is directly descended from a single man who lived 800 years ago. He was a refugee, an outcast, a boy who was forced to kill his own brother just to survive. But that same boy grew up to build the largest contiguous empire in human history. An empire that wiped out 11% of the world's population. This isn't just history. This is the story of Temujin, the boy who became the great Khan. And it all begins with a betrayal that should have killed him.
There was once a tribe that inhabited these vast and unforgiving plains. The name of this tribe was Borjigin, and its chieftain was a man named Yesugei. More than 800 years ago, this very tribe engaged in a fierce and bloody clash with the Tatars. During this brutal battle, an important and high-ranking Tatar chieftain was captured. Bound in heavy chains, this prisoner, whose name was Temujin, was brought to stand before the chief of the Borjigin tribe, Yesugei. It was at this precise moment that Yesugei received the monumental news of his son's birth. To mark the victory and honor the spirit of his foe, Yesugei decided to name his newborn son Temujin, after the very prisoner standing before him. When Temujin was born, it is said that he held a mysterious blood clot in his tiny hand. According to the ancient legends of the steppe, when the tribal elders and wise men came to know about this unusual sign, they made a startling prediction. They prophesied that this boy would not be an ordinary man, but would grow to become a great and legendary conqueror in the future. And as time passed, history proved those words to be true. This is the life story of that same child, Temujin, who is known to the entire world today as Genghis Khan. Welcome to Mystery in the Dark, where we uncover the greatest stories from the pages of history. Today, we begin an epic journey into the life of a man who changed the world forever. You are watching the first episode of our special mini-series, Who Was Genghis Khan? This is the river Onan. It flows majestically through the heart of Mongolia and crosses into the territories of Russia. This river stretches over a staggering length of 1,800 kilometers. On both sides of its banks lie vast, endless fields of grass and lush green hills that reach toward the horizon. Centuries ago, various Mongol tribes lived somewhere along the banks of this very river. The ancient Mongols shared a deep spiritual belief that all Mongols were the direct descendants of a sacred wolf that once lived along the shores of the Onan River. About 850 years ago, a Mongolian horseman was out hunting with his faithful falcon near the river. He was none other than the leader of the Borjigin tribe, Yesugei. During his hunt, his sharp eyes suddenly caught sight of a lone cart moving across the plain. A man from the Merkit tribe was leading this cart. As Yesugei drew closer to investigate, he saw a 16-year-old girl sitting inside the cart. Her name was Holin. He instantly fell in love with the girl and decided he wanted to marry her at any cost. Yesugei, along with his two brothers, launched an attack on the man. The man had no power or will to fight against such warriors, so he fled for his life, leaving behind the girl who was his wife. The girl belonged to another tribe called Olkun, and now she was in the custody of Yesugei. Soon after, Yesugei married her. Around 1162 AD, she gave birth to a child. He was given the name Temujin. In their language, Temujin means blacksmith. The place where he was born is called Delun Boldog, a remote area in northeastern Mongolia. At that time, the Mongol tribes were considered backward and lived as nomads. they wandered perpetually from one meadow to another, which means they only stayed in places where the food for themselves and fodder for their animals were abundant. They were expert hunters who could shoot their prey or enemies with lethal accuracy while riding at full speed on horseback. The young Temujin also spent his childhood learning the essential skills of horse riding and archery. When he reached the age of 9, his father decided to betroth him to a 10-year-old girl named Borte. On the request of Borte's parents, Yasuge left Temujin with his future in-laws and began his journey back home alone. However, before leaving, he gave them a strange piece of advice: to keep Temujin away from dogs. On his return journey, Yasuge felt a burning thirst. He soon found a group of Mongols feasting and celebrating near a mountain. These were the Tatar people, who were his sworn enemies. But Yasuge was confident that in the middle of such a crowd nobody would recognize him. He thought he would simply join them, eat, drink some water, and then continue his journey. So he joined the feast. It was a sacred Mongol tradition to welcome any stranger to a feast. But Yasuge's belief that he would remain unrecognized was a fatal mistake. Someone in the crowd recognized his face and secretly informed the others. The Tatars quietly slipped poison into Yasuge's food. Yasuge left the feast, thinking he had enjoyed a wonderful time. However, as he traveled, his condition began to deteriorate rapidly, and he soon realized that the poison was taking effect. Despite the agony, he somehow managed to reach his home. On the third day after being poisoned, he breathed his last breath inside his tent. But before he died, he made sure to tell his people that he had been poisoned by the Tatars. When Yasuge died, a major problem arose regarding who would become the new chief of the tribe. This small nomadic tribe strictly followed its traditions. They would only accept a powerful and tested man as their leader. They flatly refused to accept the leadership of Yasuge's widow and his young sons, instead of helping them. The tribe soon abandoned the family and began to move away. By this time, Temujin had also returned from his father-in-law's house. He and his mother tried desperately to stop the tribe from leaving, but they could not convince anyone except for a few loyalists. The remaining family now lived by the river, relying entirely on fishing and hunting wild birds for food. They crafted arrows from wood and knuckle bones, and wore clothes made from the skins of mice and dogs. This was an incredibly difficult and dark time for Temujin's family. These extreme hardships made Temujin hard, cold, and cruel. He struggled daily for food and faced countless dangers. One day, a conflict broke out with his half-brother, Bektar, who had stolen Temujin's bird. Temujin was becoming ruthless. When the same brother later stole his fish, Temujin killed him with an arrow. Temujin was the eldest of his 5 siblings, but he also had 2 half-brothers. Since he had killed one, he was now the undisputed head of the family at a very early age. Other people began to notice his growing abilities and fighting skills. These observers informed his breakaway tribe that Temujin was getting stronger and possessed special qualities. They feared that he might one day try to reclaim the leadership of the tribe. Perhaps it was this fear that led a group of tribesmen to attack his camp one day. But Temujin and his companions were prepared. They had built a strong fence around their camp. Taking positions behind the fence, they successfully held off the attackers for a time. The attackers were few in number and realized they couldn't win easily. They promised that if Temujin was handed over to them, they would spare everyone else in the camp. The people in the camp refused the offer, but during the heated conversation, Temujin found an opportunity to escape. He leaped onto a horse and fled toward the thick jungle. When the attackers saw him fleeing, they immediately gave chase. Temujin was now running for his life. He managed to reach a nearby forest and hid in its depths. His enemies surrounded that part of the jungle and waited for him to come out. The secret history of the Mongols records that Temujin spent 3 days and 3 nights in the forest without any food. On the 4th day, he decided to move out, but as he stepped out, his horse's saddle suddenly fell off. He interpreted this as a divine signal to stay hidden. So he turned back and hid again. He spent 3 more days in the jungle with nothing to eat, perhaps chewing on leaves or the bark of trees to stay alive. On the 4th day, he tried to leave again, but this time a large white rock blocked his path. Again, he saw this as a divine signal and remained in the woods. He spent another 3 days there, but by now, the hunger and thirst were becoming uncontrollable. He decided he had to leave at any cost, believing his enemies would have surely abandoned the siege by now. He pulled out his knife, cut the bushes around the white rock, and cleared his path. When the path was clear, he stepped out of the jungle. But he was wrong. His enemies were still waiting for him. They arrested him and took him away as their prisoner. They decided not to kill him but to keep him as a slave, placing a heavy wooden yoke over his neck to prevent any escape. Later, during a tribal celebration while everyone was busy dancing and drinking, Temujin saw his chance. He struck his young guard on the head, knocking him to the ground, and fled into the night. The injured boy shouted, and the tribe quickly began searching the nearby forests and streams under the bright moonlight. Because of the heavy yoke on his neck, the tribesmen were sure he couldn't have gone far. But where was Temujin? He was clever. He hadn't gone far at all. He was hiding in the thick weeds of a nearby river. During the search, a man spotted him hiding in the water. This could have been Temujin's end, but the man was a secret sympathizer. He didn't tell anyone. Instead, he told Temujin to wait, and then return to his mother and brothers, promising to remain silent. Late that night, Temujin secretly entered that man's tent. He needed help because he couldn't travel with the heavy yoke. The man and his sons helped him by burning the wooden yoke. However, guards were searching the tents, so the family hid Temujin in a cart under a massive heap of wool. When the guards came to search the cart and started removing the wool, Temujin's end seemed certain. But his supporter was clever. He complained about the intense heat, saying it was impossible for anyone to hide under the wool in such weather. The tired guards abandoned the search and left. After they were gone, the man gave Temujin a mare, meat, a bow, and arrows. Temujin tracked his family's footprints and finally reunited with them. After these events, Temujin took his family to the safety of the mountains. They survived on whatever they could find, even eating rats, and courageously faced attacks from robbers. Now, remember Temujin's fiancée, Borte? He was now 16 years old and went to his father-in-law's house to claim her. They were married, and his in-laws gave him a luxurious fur coat as a wedding gift. He returned home with his bride, hoping for a peaceful life, but he didn't know that this bride and the fur coat would change history. He learned that the powerful Kari tribe, led by Togril, also known as Ong Khan, was nearby. Ong Khan had been a close friend of Yasuge. Temujin visited him and gifted him the fur coat. Ong Khan was delighted to see his old friend's son and made Temujin his ally, promising to help him regain control of his scattered people. However, shortly after his return, a terrible shock occurred. One morning at sunrise, while the family was still sleeping, the Merkit tribe attacked. They were seeking revenge for Yasuge, stealing Temujin's mother years ago. Temujin realized the danger and hid Borte in a cart, telling a servant to take her away while he and the rest of the family fled in another direction to draw the attackers away. But ironically, Bort's cart was captured while Temujin remained safe. Bort was now a prisoner of the Merkits, just as Temujin's mother had once been a prisoner of Yesugei. Filled with rage, Temujin turned to Ong Khan for help. Ong Khan provided 20,000 troops, and Temujin's childhood friend Jamukha brought another 20,000 fighters. With this massive army of 40,000, Temujin chased the Merkits for 400 kilometers until they found them camped on the banks of Lake Baikal in Russia, the deepest freshwater lake in the world. Temujin launched a devastating night attack. In the chaos of clashing swords and screams, Temujin shouted, "Borte! Borte!" Borte, who was also trying to flee in the confusion, recognized his voice, jumped from her cart, and ran to her husband. They were finally reunited and remained together for the rest of their lives. Most of the Merkit tribe was wiped out. However, there was a complication. Borte had become pregnant during her 8 months of captivity. Shortly after her rescue, she gave birth to a son named Jochi. While others in the family called him a son of the Merkits and refused to acknowledge him, Temujin's love for Borte was so great that he adopted the child as his own. This was the moment Temujin began to truly make history. But how did he get the title of Genghis Khan? Why did he eventually fight his best friend Jamukha? And why did he decide to conquer the entire world? We will show you all this in the next episode of the Genghis Khan miniseries. In the meantime, tell us in the comments what you think of Temujin's childhood. Temujin's closest companion and blood brother Jamukha was brought before him in chains. Temujin offered him the chance to become friends once again, but the answer Jamukha gave was a complete surprise to him. What was that answer? How did Temujin transform from a minor chieftain into the scourge of God, Genghis Khan? This difficult journey is stained red with many betrayals and countless drops of blood. But what exactly is this journey? I am your host, and in this second episode of Mystery in the Dark's special series, Who Was Genghis Khan?, we are showing you exactly that. During Temujin's childhood, another Mongol tribe called the Jataran used to set up their camp near him every winter. These people were not hunters like Temujin. Instead, they were peaceful nomads who herded sheep and goats. They had good relations with Temujin's tribe. A deep friendship developed between Temujin and a boy from this tribe named Jamukha. Their bond was so strong that they hunted together and ate from the same bowl. According to the Secret History of the Mongols, the oldest book written about Genghis Khan, it is even stated that Temujin and Jamukha slept in the same bed. By the age of 12, they had even tasted each other's blood. There was a tradition among the Mongols that when two individuals became deep friends and took an oath of loyalty, they would symbolically exchange gifts. During this, they would also drink a few drops of each other's blood. The Mongols called this ritual Anda. In English, you can call them blood brothers. One day, after a hunt, Jamukha pulled out the horns of a dead calf, made a hole in them to create a necklace, and presented it to Temujin as a gift. In return, Temujin gave Jamukha an arrow. They both drank a few drops of each other's blood. Now, they were traditionally one soul in two bodies. They could now give their lives for each other, or take them. Being nomads, they eventually drifted apart, moving between rivers and mountains. After spending a few years of childhood together, the two friends separated, but they did not forget each other. They kept track of one another through passing caravans. When Temujin's wife Borte was abducted, the army of 20,000 that came to rescue her was sent by Jamukha. After Borte's return, Jamukha and Temujin began living in the same camp. By this time, Jamukha had become the chief of his tribe, and Temujin had gathered many loyalists around him, becoming a leader in his own right. Both friends began building a massive army together. They started gathering nomadic Mongols around them to create a great force. But therein lay the problem. Both of them wanted to rule over all of Mongolia. As the Mongol proverb says, just as there cannot be two suns in the sky, there cannot be two leaders of the Mongols. In the struggle for power, even blood relations fade, and these were brothers made through the ritual of Anda. A tug of war for absolute power began between them, manifesting in small grievances. Jamukha complained to Temujin about why he was appointing commoners as commanders while ignoring the nobility. When this grievance wasn't addressed, he became distant. One day, he told Temujin to camp by the river with his sheep while he took his horses to the grasslands. Hearing this, Temujin's wife, Borte, warned him. Jamukha is tired of your friendship. Leave him and move forward under the cover of night. Temujin did exactly that, leaving Jamukha's camp behind. After a year and a half together, the two friends went their separate ways. One day, Temujin was informed that his old breakaway tribe, the one that had abandoned and imprisoned him as a child, had joined forces with Jamukha. This was Jamukha's practical declaration of enmity. Two separate ceremonies were held in the two camps. In Jamukha's camp, many supporting tribes gathered and gave him the title of Gur Khan, meaning the supreme leader of the Mongols. However, some of Jamukha's supporters left him and joined Temujin. One man told Temujin he had a dream, where the earth and sky said that only Temujin should be the great Khan. Thus, a ceremony was held in Temujin's camp as well. He was given the title Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. Note that neither took the title of Khagan yet, as they knew that until one was defeated or accepted the other's authority, neither could truly be the king of kings. The spark for war was a minor incident. Jamukha's brother, Taichar, stole horses belonging to a friend of Genghis Khan. The friend pursued the thief and killed him. When Jamukha learned of his brother's death, he was enraged. He raised an army of 30,000 and attacked Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan had only 13,000 soldiers. Despite fighting bravely, the field belonged to Jamukha. Genghis Khan fled and hid in a mountain pass. He then received the agonizing news that Jamukha had captured 70 people from an allied tribe and killed them by dipping them into boiling water. Learning this, Genghis Khan took a vow. He would prepare himself so thoroughly that he would never face defeat again. Before a final showdown with Jamukha, Genghis Khan wanted to settle scores with the Tartars, his family's ancestral enemies who had poisoned his father. He and his ally, Ong Khan, launched a decisive attack and shattered the Tartar power. Genghis Khan ordered that every Tartar male taller than the linchpin of a cartwheel be executed. This broke the back of the Tartars forever. During this campaign, they were helped by the Chinese Jin Dynasty, who were also troubled by the Tartars. The Chinese rulers gave Ong Khan the title of Wang, Prince. But they failed to recognize Genghis Khan's potential, giving him only a minor commander's title. Little did they know that this minor commander would soon become their ruler. Genghis Khan turned his attention back to Jamukha. Interestingly, Jamukha had sorcerers on his side this time. Legend says these sorcerers promised Jamukha they would bring a great storm to wash away Genghis Khan's army. The battle began, and the sorcerers started their incantations. A storm did come, but it hit Jamukha's army instead. His forces lost their formation, and the command structure broke. Seeing their own tricks fail, the sorcerers fled, crying that, "The sky has turned against us." Genghis Khan easily swept through Jamukha's remaining army. Jamukha fled, but Temujin captured the very people who had abandoned him after his father's death. He executed the leading family, but forgave the commoners and absorbed them into his leadership. During the battle, Genghis Khan was nearly killed by a deep neck wound. His loyal companion Jelmi sat by his side all night, sucking out the clotted blood from the wound. When Genghis Khan was thirsty, Jelmi bravely sneaked into the enemy camp to steal a pot of milk. This saved Genghis Khan's life. Later, Genghis Khan's alliance with Ong Khan broke because Ong Khan's son refused to marry his sister to Temujin's son, Jochi. After a failed assassination attempt on Temujin, a 3-day battle ensued. Ong Khan fled, but was mistakenly killed by a guard of the Naiman tribe who thought he was a common thief. Now, the Naiman tribe and the fugitive Jamukha were the final obstacles. Temujin used psychological warfare, ordering every soldier to light 5 fires at night. The Naiman spies were terrified, reporting that the Mongol army was as vast as the stars in the sky. Jamukha began playing a double game, secretly sending messages to Genghis Khan while advising the Naiman chief to retreat. Because of Jamukha's betrayal, the Naiman chief was trapped and killed. Jamukha fled with 5 companions, but after a year of wandering, his companions grew greedy for the reward Genghis Khan had placed on his head. They captured Jamukha and brought him to Temujin. Instead of rewarding them, Genghis Khan ordered their execution for betraying their leader. He then turned to Jamukha, his childhood blood brother. Temujin said, "Fate has brought us together again. Let us be one once more." But Jamukha replied, "Just as there is only one sun in the sky, there can be only one ruler of the Mongols. If I live, I will always be trouble for you. Kill me, but give me a death where my blood does not touch the ground." According to old books, Genghis Khan had Jamukha's back broken to kill him without spilling blood. Modern historians, however, believe this was an act, and that Jamukha was actually killed brutally to ensure no one could ever use him against Genghis Khan again. With Jamukha and the great chiefs gone, Genghis Khan was the undisputed leader. In 1206, at the source of the Onon River, a great assembly called the Kurultai was held. A white banner with 9 tails was raised. All tribes unanimously accepted him as the Kagan. He now believed the blue sky had destined him to rule the world. His next target was the very empire that had called him a minor commander, China. How did the Mongols on horseback face Chinese gunpowder? Find out in the next episode. What do you think about Jamukha? Was he a double agent or a true enemy? Tell us in the comments. There is a story that one day, Genghis Khan disappeared onto the peak of a sacred mountain. When he returned, he made a grand proclamation. The god of the sky had granted him the joyous news of the conquest of China. But there was a massive problem. The Chinese possessed gunpowder, the most dangerous weapon of that era. How did Genghis Khan, sitting on the bare backs of horses, face guns and explosive shells? And most importantly, why did he feel the need to challenge an empire as magnificent and powerful as China in the first place? I am your host, and in this second to last episode of the mini-series, Who Was Genghis Khan? On Mystery in the Dark, we will show you exactly that. During the era of Genghis Khan, China was ruled by powerful dynasties, the most formidable being the Jin dynasty. They were also known as the Great Jin. Their rulers worshipped the sky as God and called themselves the Sons of Heaven. On the other side, Genghis Khan made the same claim, that he was the chosen son of the eternal blue sky, and that the sovereignty of the entire world had been placed in his lap. This ideological clash was the primary reason for their confrontation. However, another major cause of conflict was the constant friction along their borders. Since the Chinese Empire was more powerful, the aggression often started from their side. Soldiers of the Jin Empire would frequently raid Mongol territories, looting their wealth, dishonoring their families, and kidnapping Mongol children to be sold into slavery. In response, Mongol and Tartar warbands would also carry out raids in Chinese territories. This cycle of violence had become a routine part of life. Eventually, a new emperor ascended the Jin throne. He was unwilling to give the Mongols any more importance than that of mere nomadic wanderers. He sent a message to Genghis Khan demanding that he accept the suzerainty of the Chinese emperor. Genghis Khan listened to the message, turned toward the direction of China, and spat on the ground with great force. He then jumped onto his horse and rode away. This single act was his silent but clear declaration of war against the Jin Empire. In the year 1211, he gathered his tribes for this purpose. Men, women, and children divided into separate groups to pray to the god of the sky for victory. But Genghis Khan was not among those praying in the camp. Where was he? He had traveled to the beautiful and high peak of Burkhan Khaldun, located in what is now Mongolia's Gorky Terel National Park. The Mongols considered this mountain sacred. Genghis Khan stayed on this peak for 3 to 4 days. When he descended, his face was filled with absolute determination. He told his army, "Rejoice, rejoice! The blue sky has promised us victory." Hearing this news, the Mongols were filled with a fierce new spirit. The Chinese population was massive, and their army was equally large and far more modern than the Mongols. Genghis Khan, like a seasoned general, understood that passion alone would not defeat the Chinese. Therefore, he played a deep strategic move. He divided the Chinese army into 2 parts. He did this by exploiting the rebellious sentiments in Manchuria, an important region of the Jin Empire. Genghis Khan incited a revolt there. Naturally, a large portion of the Chinese army was sent to Manchuria to crush the rebellion, leaving the central regions with fewer troops. It was during this time, in May 1211, that Genghis Khan launched his invasion of the Jin Empire. He initially had an army of 65,000. This force crossed the 1,000-kilometer-long Gobi Desert in just 1 month and entered northern China. Genghis Khan was confident of victory, but contrary to his hopes, he initially failed. Despite having fewer troops, the Chinese successfully defended themselves. The reason was that Genghis Khan's homework was incomplete. He was an expert in open-field combat, but the way the Chinese had fortified their cities into invincible fortresses was entirely new to him. He lacked catapults to break strong walls or specialized equipment to tear down massive gates. This caused every siege to take much longer than expected. Furthermore, the winter season began. Amidst the falling snow, forget fighting. Even camping in a foreign land became impossible. Thus, Genghis Khan returned not with victory, but with a valuable experience. Learning from his failed attack, he prepared again. In 1213, Genghis Khan invaded the Jin Empire once more. This time he was better prepared. His army was larger, and the pace of his conquests was lightning fast. He captured region after region as he advanced toward the Jin capital, Zhongdu. This city was located exactly where modern-day Beijing stands. The Jin Empire was resisting, but the truth was that they lacked the trained soldiers and resources to match such a massive Mongol horde. To fill this gap, Chinese commanders began recruiting poor farmers. These farmers were made part of the infantry, supported by cavalry units of trained soldiers. The Chinese formation in the field placed the peasant infantry in the center, with trained cavalry standing in ranks on the left and right. Genghis Khan observed this. He found a brilliant solution. When the battle began, Mongol archers rained arrows on the peasant infantry, forcing them to retreat in panic. This left only the cavalry units on the flanks. While the arrows were falling, Mongol horsemen would ride behind the hills, circle around, and attack the enemy cavalry from the rear. Trapped in a pincer movement, the Chinese cavalry was annihilated. Similarly, Genghis Khan found a clever trick for capturing fortresses. His soldiers would first surround a Chinese fort. After some time, they would leave their supplies and pretend to retreat in a hurry. Seeing the Mongols fleeing, the Chinese soldiers would open the gates to loot the abandoned supplies or pursue the enemy. The Mongol army was always prepared for this. Their hidden units and the fleeing force would turn back and strike. This tactic gave the Chinese no time to even close the gates, allowing the Mongols to conquer fortress after fortress. At this point, a question must arise in your mind. China had built the magnificent Great Wall, and its main purpose was to stop invaders. So, how did Genghis Khan cross this obstacle? History provides two versions. One is that he bypassed the wall by finding a different route. It is also rumored that the Jin army guarding the area was a mercenary force, which Genghis Khan easily bribed or won over. Other hypotheses exist as well. However, there is a second, more rational version, that during Genghis Khan's era, the Great Wall was not yet so massive or continuous that it was impossible to cross. Therefore, with a bit of strategy, Genghis Khan was able to cross it. After capturing fortress after fortress, he reached the heart of the Jin Empire, Beijing. What he saw there was enough to blow his mind. Genghis Khan was used to living among rivers, tents, mountains, and small temporary towns. He had seen other Chinese cities on the way, but they weren't particularly large. When he approached a magnificent global city like Beijing, the sight was like something out of a fairy tale. Before him lay a vast metropolis stretching for miles. He saw the silhouettes of massive buildings from afar. He was lost in wonder and thought because the city was as secure as it was large. The security was top-notch. The city was surrounded by walls 30 miles long and 40 feet high. There were 900 towers on these walls where archers kept watch. There were 12 main gates. On 3 sides, the city was surrounded by a moat filled with water. Interestingly, 4 smaller cities had been built outside the capital for its protection. These 4 also had strong walls and moats, and they were connected to the capital via underground tunnels. Each of these satellite cities housed 4,000 soldiers, while 20,000 to 24,000 troops remained alert inside the capital. The total protective force reached 40,000, which could suddenly be increased to 400,000 because the entire population could be drafted into battle. For a nomadic army, Beijing was almost invincible. Genghis Khan realized he couldn't conquer this city through a direct assault. He decided to put the emperor under pressure by keeping the city under a continuous siege to cut off all supplies. He stationed 5,000 soldiers to block all roads leading to the city and sent an ambassador offering peace in exchange for certain conditions. However, the emperor was very proud of his defense system and rejected the offer. believing Genghis Khan would eventually be forced to leave empty-handed by the harsh weather. But he was unaware of a conspiracy. One of his governors, Qi Cheng, was dreaming of seizing the throne. He avoided the Mongol soldiers and reached the gates of Beijing, shouting that the Mongols were after him. The guards opened the gates, but once inside, Qi Cheng launched an attack on the royal palace. The emperor and his guards could not withstand the sudden strike, and the Golden Khan, as the Mongols called the emperor, was killed. Qi Cheng chose to be a kingmaker rather than the king, placing a weak member of the Jin family on the throne while he became the supreme commander. The only benefit Genghis Khan got from this was that Qi Cheng fell ill shortly after taking command. Even while ill, Qi Cheng led the army from a cart and pushed the Mongols back for 2 days. But his health worsened, and on the third day, he sent a commander named Cao to face the Mongols, threatening to behead him if he returned defeated. Cao went to the battlefield with the fear of death, and he lost. To avoid being executed by his boss, Cao secretly entered the city with his loyalists and beheaded Qi Cheng instead. News of Qi Cheng's death sparked a civil war inside Beijing. For 2 days, the two groups fought and bled each other out. Eventually, the puppet emperor intervened and brokered a peace. Cao was made the new supreme commander, but the city's condition was deteriorating. Due to the siege, food was running out. Genghis Khan then made a major decision. Leaving 5,000 troops to guard the blockades, he sent the rest of his army in small groups to loot other cities of the Jin Empire. The goal was to break the emperor's spirit with news of destruction elsewhere and to gather rations for the Mongol army. To capture these new cities, the Mongols changed their tactics. The fleeing trick no longer worked as Chinese soldiers now understood it. So the Mongols began capturing Chinese villagers and using them as human shields to break the gates. Often, the guards on the walls would recognize their own people and hesitate to attack. This tactic was very successful, and the Mongols looted city after city, taking slaves and burning crops. The Jin emperor could no longer watch his empire burn. Lacking the courage to fight, he requested peace. In early 1214, a treaty was signed. According to the terms, the emperor's daughter was to marry Genghis Khan. The Jin Empire was also bound to pay 3,000 horses, 100,000 gold plates, and 300,000 yards of silk. Genghis Khan loosened the siege and opened a few roads. However, the Chinese emperor made a fatal mistake. Seeing the siege relax, he fled Beijing and hid in the southern city of Kaifeng. This city was even more secure, with a wall 120 miles long. When Genghis Khan heard of the flight, he was furious. He declared it a violation of the treaty and ordered a total and brutal siege of Beijing. This time, the blockade was so tight that food completely vanished. People began eating their own dead. Generals began deserting the city under the cover of night, some even joining the Mongols just to get a meal. In these desperate times, the defenders tried one last weapon, a weapon that no one else in the world likely had: gunpowder. Yes, by 1215, the Chinese had developed gunpowder and were using early versions of cannons and guns. Luckily for Genghis Khan, these weapons were in their early stages and were not mature. Their aim was poor, and they didn't cause enough destruction to force the enemy back. The defenders fired shells and bullets at the Mongols, but they soon ran out of gunpowder. They even began melting gold and silver to make projectiles. But none of this worked. By June 1st, 1215, after nearly a year and a half of siege, the guards opened the gates and invited a violent storm inside. When the Mongol army entered the city, no house remained safe, and no human was spared. 60,000 girls committed suicide to escape the Mongols. The Mongols burned all places of worship, destroyed the gates, and set entire neighborhoods on fire. The number of people killed in and around Beijing is still unknown, but estimates reach into the hundreds of thousands. They built towers of skulls and corpses. It is said there were so many bodies that the fat from the decomposing corpses spread through the streets, making them slippery. At the time of Beijing's fall, Genghis Khan was 361 kilometers away in Dolan Nor. In 1216, he returned to Mongolia with treasures of gold, silver, precious stones, and silk. When thousands of carts arrived in Mongolia, the people were speechless with wonder. Some items had colors the Mongols had never seen before. Thousands of doctors, artists, and skilled workers were brought as slaves, and they introduced the Mongols to art, culture, and modern civilization. Genghis Khan had spent 5 years in China and had devastated the capital of the very empire that had once treated him as a minor commander. Beijing's ruin marked the beginning of the end for the Jin Empire. Although it lasted another 20 years, its back was broken. Genghis Khan also subdued the Western Xia and the Uyghur Kingdom. The Uyghur king showed wisdom by surrendering without a fight. The Uyghurs and Chinese joined the Mongol army in large numbers, teaching them how to build catapults and modern war engines. Mongol power grew even further in 1218 when they conquered the Kara Khitan Khanate. The Turkic Muslims living there, tired of oppression, joined Genghis Khan, viewing him as a savior. While Genghis Khan did not live to rule all of China, his grandson Kublai Khan eventually completed the conquest. However, during his own life, Genghis Khan went on to annihilate a massive and powerful Islamic empire. Which empire was that? Why did he attack a powerful Muslim state? Why could the Muslims not resist despite their large numbers? Who was the one general who remained a headache for Genghis Khan for years? And why, despite all efforts, has Genghis Khan's grave never been found? We will show you all this in the next and final episode of Who Was Genghis Khan? In the meantime, tell us in the comments, were your sympathies with the besieged Chinese citizens or with Genghis Khan's army? So friends, where were we? Genghis Khan had already put his closest childhood friend, Jamukha, to eternal sleep. He had forced the great Jin dynasty of China to its knees, and now his gaze was fixed upon the Islamic world. He often said, "My true comfort lies in shattering my enemies, leaving their kin in tears, and seizing their wealth and families." He proved his words true. From Central Asia to the borders of Europe, he wrote tales of blood. But then, a courageous Muslim general presented such a fierce challenge that the myth of Mongol invincibility began to fade. Who was that fearless commander? How did his confrontation with Genghis Khan unfold? And why has the grave of this great conqueror never been found? I am your host, and in this final thrilling episode of Who Was Genghis Khan, we will unveil these facts. While Genghis Khan was raining fire on the lands of China, a new power was rising to his west. This state was founded by a Turkic sultan, Muhammad II bin Alauddin Khwarazm Shah. He had established the largest Islamic empire of his time, Khwarazm, which stretched from Kazakhstan to Iran and the borders of modern-day Pakistan. he preferred to be called the Second Alexander, and his eyes were set on conquering China and Baghdad. However, he made a political blunder that brought him face to face with the wrath of Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan was now the master of a vast territory. China's wealth and silk were under his influence. With the help of the experts, artists, and traders he had gathered, he wanted to strengthen his empire's economy. To achieve this, he sought to establish trade links with the Western world. He sent a message to Sultan Muhammad II. "My intention is not to seize your lands. Rather, I seek mutual trade." In a letter, Genghis Khan wrote, "I am the king of the land of the rising sun, and you are the ruler of the land of the setting sun." The Sultan seemingly accepted this offer and agreed to trade. Genghis Khan immediately sent a large trade delegation, consisting of 450 Muslim merchants and 100 Mongol guards. When this trade caravan reached the border city of Otrar in Kazakhstan, a horrific event occurred that changed the fate of millions. The city's governor, Inalchuk, accused the Mongols of espionage and brutally slaughtered the entire caravan. Only one person managed to escape this massacre and reach Mongolia to tell the tale of this atrocity. Genghis Khan was furious, but he remained patient and sent a 3-member delegation led by a Muslim to the Sultan. The demand was that the governor of Otrar be handed over to the Mongols for justice. However, the Sultan disregarded diplomatic protocols, martyred Genghis Khan's Muslim envoy, and sent the other 2 Mongols back in humiliation after shaving their beards. When Genghis Khan learned of the mistreatment of his envoys, he lost his composure. He once again went to the peak of his sacred mountain, Burkan Khaldun, spread his hands toward the sky, and called upon his deity, saying, "Give me the strength to avenge this humiliation." Finally, he sent a message to Alauddin. "You have shed the blood of my envoys and merchants and looted our goods. The time for peace has passed. Prepare to face an army that you will not be able to stop." In May 1219, Genghis Khan descended upon Khwarezm with a force of 120,000 soldiers. His army included a large number of Chinese engineers, along with Turks, Mongols, and Uyghur warriors. The Sultan had twice as many soldiers as the Mongols. But he made a strategic error by dividing his army behind the walls of various cities instead of facing them in one place. The result of this decision was catastrophic. The Mongols besieged the cities one by one and began destroying them. Otrar fell after 5 months of fighting, and the entire population, including Governor Gher Khan, was put to death. Following this, the great Islamic centers of Bukhara and Samarkand met the same fate. Genghis Khan ravaged these cities so mercilessly that when the famous traveler Ibn Battuta passed through a century later, he saw only desolation and ruins. Genghis Khan did not stop at the destruction of Samarkand. He kept moving forward. He was determined to conquer all of Khwarezm. However, he did not harm the Uzbek city of Nurtra. It is said that he spared this city either because of the sacred shrines located there, or due to a secret understanding with some local religious leaders. The extraordinary speed of the Mongols, who could cover hundreds of kilometers in a day, was the primary reason for their success. In no time, they occupied Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. Sultan Muhammad II was now a fugitive in his own empire. Genghis Khan ordered his soldiers, "Even if the Sultan hides in the heights of the sky, find him and bring him to me. Do not show me your faces until he is captured." A massive Mongol detachment pursued the Sultan like hunting dogs. The Sultan sought refuge from city to city. He had secured his family and women in a fortress, but the Mongols captured that too. Now, the Sultan only had his son, Jalaluddin, and a few loyalists left. The once powerful ruler was now in such a state that his clothes were tattered and he had become destitute. While fleeing, he reached the shores of the Caspian Sea. The Mongols were upon him. He escaped in a boat just as a rain of arrows was fired from behind, but he miraculously survived. The Sultan's final days were agonizing. He moved from one island to another. This constant fear and flight broke him mentally. Finally, on January 10, 1221, Sultan Muhammad II passed away due to pneumonia. Such was his helplessness that no shroud could be found for his burial, and he had to be buried in his rags. But the Mongol wrath had not yet cooled. When they learned of the Sultan's death, they dug up his grave, pulled out the body, and burned it. The Sultan's mother and family were taken captive, humiliated, and forced to mourn the destruction of their empire. But in this darkness, one hope remained: the Sultan's son, Jalaluddin Khwarazm Shah, who had not been captured and was now becoming a new symbol of resistance against the Mongols. Jalaluddin headed toward Afghanistan, where a force of his supporters was gathering in Ghazni. Ghazni was still safe from the Mongols. Jalaluddin defeated several small Mongol detachments while passing through various regions and reached Ghazni in 1221, where 50,000 soldiers swore an oath to stand by him. A brave general named Timur Malik also joined him in this mission, having previously fought the Mongols valiantly. Their combined strength breathed a new soul into the Muslims. A force of 80,000 was now ready in Ghazni. During this time, Genghis Khan's son-in-law, Kuchu, was killed in the Iranian city of Nishapur. To avenge this, Genghis Khan's son, Tolui Khan, headed toward Nishapur and caused such destruction that even animals were killed alongside humans. While this grief was still fresh, Genghis Khan's favorite grandson, Mutukin, was also killed outside the Bamiyan fortress in Afghanistan. Genghis Khan himself reached Bamiyan and turned the entire city into a cursed city, where no living being was left to breathe. Genghis Khan sent a large army of 40,000 under one of his top generals to pursue Jalaluddin. The two armies clashed at Parwan in Afghanistan. Here, the Muslims defeated the Mongols so severely that they fled the battlefield. This was the first major historical defeat of Genghis Khan's army. The Muslims treated the Mongol prisoners the same way the Mongols had treated others. This victory awakened the entire Islamic world. When Genghis Khan heard this, he took to the field himself. Jalaluddin now retreated toward the banks of the Indus River, Kalabag, to cross the river. When the Mongols surrounded him, Jalaluddin burned his boats and threw his treasure into the river so that nothing would fall into the enemy's hands. A bloody battle ensued, in which most of Jalaluddin's companions were martyred. When he saw that no way out remained, he jumped into the roaring waters of the Indus River with his horse from a height of 60 feet. Genghis Khan stood on the bank, watching this astonishing sight. His soldiers were about to fire arrows when Genghis Khan stopped them and, praising Jalaluddin's bravery, said, "It is a matter of pride to be the father of such a brave son. Let him go." Jalaluddin crossed the river and reached Delhi, but Sultan Iltutmish refused to grant him asylum out of fear of the Mongols. Jalaluddin fought against the Mongols for years and was eventually killed by a Kurd in 1231. Genghis Khan could not bear the sweltering heat of India and returned to Central Asia. He was now over 60 years old. He consulted Chinese healers to avoid death, but he realized that death is inevitable. In 1225, he returned to his homeland, Mongolia. he divided the empire among his sons, but serious differences arose between his favorite son, Genghis Khan, and Chagatai. It is said that Genghis Khan had his own son, Jochi, killed by poisoning. In 1226, while suppressing a rebellion, he was either injured or fell ill. And finally, in August 1227, he passed away at the age of 65. His death was kept secret, and the place where he spent his childhood was chosen for his burial. The measures taken to hide Genghis Khan's grave left history stunned. Hundreds of people who participated in the funeral were killed, and then 800 horses were run over the site to level the ground. Those horsemen were also later killed. According to some legends, the course of a river was diverted to run over the grave. This is why, despite centuries of searching, no sign of Genghis Khan's grave has been found. Today in Mongolia, he is held in the status of a deity and a founder. His descendants spread so far that, according to a study, 1 in every 200 men in the world is related to Genghis Khan's family. He established the world's largest contiguous empire, but its price was paid with the lives of 40 million people. Friends, this series on Genghis Khan ends here. In your opinion, was Genghis Khan a great conqueror or merely a ruthless killer? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more such historical videos.